and Brews, number 33. Normally, because this is Books and Brews Lite, I forget to ask what my guest is drinking. I'm drinking wine because it's 6 p.m. here. I am cold because I was outside trying to catch our neighbor's cow. And what a way to meet our neighbor. But I would like to, yeah.
Oh, it's 9 a.m. here, so I'm also drinking wine. Only joking.
Perfect. Coffee wine, right?
Yeah, wine in a coffee takeaway mug.
Right. I might have done that once or twice. So our guest today, if you can't tell from the accent, is coming all the way from Australia, Brady Gunn. And I believe this is Books and Brews Lite, number 33. If I'm wrong, as I've often been, I'll fix that on the video. But welcome, Brady.
Thank you. I'm honored. Honored to be number 33.
It's a good number. And what that means is since my first co-host and I started Books and Brews, we used to do it monthly. Now I'm doing it more once or twice a week in addition to the monthly podcast. You are, I believe, the 103rd author that we've interviewed.
Excellent.
Yeah. So we're really starting to get up there. What part of Australia are you in?
I live in Byron Bay, so that's just south of Brisbane on the beach.
Okay. For those who don't know where Brisbane is, what is that? East, west,
East
north,
Coast,
south?
yeah,
East
Brisbane.
Coast. Okay.
Was north of Sydney, in the state of Queensland. So I'm right up on the South Wales.
Okay. I have actually been to Sydney. I was there for approximately, I was out of the country for 36 hours. I was probably in Sydney no more than 12. It's a long flight. Who was playing there? Neil Diamond. Diamond was there. And so I was not married to my husband at the time, and I didn't want to accept a gift that big. So I kept saying, no. And he finally said to me, he's 72. He might be dead next year. I said, book the tickets. And it was an absolutely fantastic concert. So it's incredible to hear like 10,000 people all singing Sweet Caroline. It was amazing. So anyway, welcome. You have a very interesting life story. And I say that having met and interviewed some people with very interesting life stories. Go ahead and tell our audience about yourself.
Yeah, I mean, in where do you start? But in context to the book, which basically, and my past basically wrote that book. It was a very challenging beginning of the life for me. It was a very challenging childhood. I was a very unhappy child for multiple reasons that I won't go into, but we've all got a story. And so a lot of people's stories are much more horrific than mine. A lot of stories are much nicer than mine. And a lot of stories are much, a lot of childhoods create a story that's much more spoilt, that creates problems as much as sort of being even abused or something. So I won't go into it, but a very unhappy child, really challenging childhood, very unhappy teenager, went down a slippery slope and sort of pulled myself back out of that. And then I was proud of myself and what I was doing after my teenage years, but still a very unhappy adult. I really just was not a happy man, and a lot of it stemmed from that first childhood story, and a lot of the story that's established in those first formative years of sort of say 5 to 7 years old, lay a foundation, and then we just continue to build evidence and build scaffolds off those stories of being unwanted or being lonely or whatever the story that's either been presented to us or we've made up in our heads, which a lot of us do. And so a lot of it was sort of I just continued to build evidence to the fact that I was lonely and that I was unwanted, until I got to a certain point where I had quite a large depression for 7 or 8 years there. And I was simultaneously sort of quite a high achiever at this stage. I was strong enough to just be able to ignore that depression and just keep getting up, even though I thought about killing myself every day for sort of 7 or 8 years at that stage there. And was doing a lot of self-help work. I've always read a lot of books. I've always kept out of my comfort zone in life. I'd always sat in spiritual circles. And so I was doing the work, but I really was just still not happy. I hadn't been in a relationship for many years. And I finally got to the point where I sort of almost just stopped. It was like that depression was chasing me, my whole story of my whole past, which is just such intricate stuff and knows you so well and can get you so easily. It's got this whole portfolio of evidence that it can sort of use back on you as to why I'm a piece of shit or why I'm unwanted. I mean, it's all right there. So I got to the point where I just sort of stopped almost one day. It wasn't quite as simple as this, but stopped and just turned around. And I'm like, I'm just tired of running. I'm tired of being chased by this crap. It's over. Either do what you're going to do or whatever. I'm just done with it. And at that point there, it's almost like seeing a bear in the woods. If you see you see a bear in the woods, you don't run. It'll chase after you. You just stop and you turn around, and you might be crapping your dacks. I mean, there's a freaking bear there, and a lot of our story and a lot of our history is really scary stuff. It's very real. We've got a direct relationship with it. It's an intricate part of our character. To stop and actually just face the thing that we've been running from for so long is a very, very scary thing to do. But then I realised that this is sort of an interesting and simple way of putting it, but it's quite a good analogy, is that the bear's sort of roaring at you and you're crapping yourself. I mean, you finally just learn how to surrender control to something that you don't know what it is, basically, is what's happening at that moment. And the bear's roaring and you're really scared, but eventually the bear wanders off and you realise that I realised that a lot of my story and a lot of that depression and a lot of the feeling that came with that depression was based on my head, my thinking. So I was one of those thinkers. So I would think myself into oblivion. I'd speculate into the future. I'd expect people to behave that certain way. I'd expect myself to achieve this sort of stuff. I'd try and over analyze the things of my past. I'd judge everybody. I'd self-annihilate. But it was all thought.
Right. Now, can I ask you something? This is a question. I have a very personal interest in this because I've seen many families over the years where there might be 3-4 kids, there's some dysfunction going on, and one of the kids manages to do what you did, to pull away from that, to turn that background off, for lack of a better word, to overcome it. Why do you think that some people can and some people don't seem able to?
Well, probably. I mean, that's a very broad question. I can't speak on behalf of other people, and I really don't know. I can only sort of tell you what worked for me, and I think ultimately what he uses boils down to the fact of how much we learn how to not think and how much we learn how to process pain. When you look at some people who've been through ultra atrocities, I mean, Hutus and Tutsis and stuff like that, way worse than ever, and yet they're singing in the fields right now. Why did they? And yet some people who've had just mum died when they were 6 or something, which is horrible, really dragging that around, really rechurning it and really branding themselves and the world through those goggles of what happened when they were 6. So why is that person still dragging that relatively small thing around? And why are the Hutus and the Tutsis singing in the field right now? It's because they expressed the end. When that happened for the Hutus and Tutsis, they threw themselves to the ground and they pulled their hair out and they wailed and screamed and flailed around and mourned properly and really expelled that energy, that residual energy from that horrific event from their body. And then they didn't think about it too much. Whereas a lot of us hold this either really quite simple energy. I mean, some of the stuff that's really affecting people's lives is so stupid. Some of it's really heavy stuff, and some of it utter nonsense.
Don't get me started on the stupidity that some people get upset about.
but held it. And so that residual energy is still in the body. And when we label things, that gives the energy a foothold and a meaning and a point of reference. So when you learn how to not think, it was only when I stopped calling my loneliness that it didn't have a label, therefore all of this meaning. So I'd call myself lonely, and then there'd be a meaning because I've always been lonely and I don't have a girlfriend, and everybody else does, and it's always been like this, and she rejected me or he rejected me, or I don't have any money. There'd be a whole sort of story off this label of loneliness. So it was only when I stopped calling my loneliness that then it would go back to the feeling in my body, and without the label of loneliness, which was perpetuating the pain, then the loneliness came out of my body in tears and flailing around, and it was very physical for me, and I think it is for a lot of people, but that energy then was able to move. And so it's actually our head that's getting in the way of moving energy, and it's the head that's perpetuating it as well. It's really quite fascinating to watch. And so when I started separating myself from myself in terms of the feeling of loneliness and the loneliness story that was happening in my head. I was like, okay, who's looking at who then? If I'm telling myself to get over myself, then who was telling who to get over myself? It was almost like there was two parts. There was this true self, which operates in energy and comes from a different place, and there was this needy little prick that was the one that was sort of wanting everything and judging everybody and going round and round and round like a hamster wheel in my head, awake at night.
I found your book very interesting. Again, I can relate to a lot of what you're saying, and I can remember those days when it was just this constant internal conversation to the point I was screaming at myself, shut up. I don't want to hear your voice in my head anymore. And I thought it was interesting that you kind of talked about depression and trauma, and it seemed to me that you're linking that with this hamster brain. Am I correct in thinking that?
Yeah, absolutely. The old pain is being used by the hamster wheel of thought to give life to itself, basically. I mean, it goes a bit deeper than that. But without the old, when I moved the old pain from the body, I mean, it was like an exorcism. It really was for me. I cried and cried every night for 2 or 3 years. But I wasn't crying because Daddy did this and all of the old story. I was crying the energy from my body. I was physically moving the energy from my body when I was crying. And it's quite an interesting exercise to lay on the lounge room floor by yourself and bawl your eyes out and just keep asking for more and more and more. Very incongruous or whatever the word is, but when my mind started getting back into, my mind started trying to cry for a reason, I'd say, no, go away, mind. The label will perpetuate the tears. We're not crying because of poor me. We're crying the energy from our body. And when after 2 or 3 years that I sort of sat up and looked around and that energy had been exercised or moved from my body, thoughts didn't have anything to hold on to.
Right.
Far more in my intuition, A, because there was less noise in my head, and B, because there was less noise in my energy, because I'd moved a lot of the old crap or entities, or a lot of people got different ideas, they're all thought of the same thing. But once they'd moved, then there was no ammunition for the mind to start, and then I was in my intuition.
Right. And so you have actually 3 books out, and I know you're reading Shh today. But I'm really interested in your, I also want you to tell the audience about your other 2 books, maybe before we get into the book you came here to talk about. So you have a book about backpacking and Smiley Face Fatigues. Is that what the other one is called?
Yeah. The backpacking book is a book of the journeys that I've done around the world. I backpack around the world for years by myself in all sorts of crazy places like Afghanistan and Pakistan and Mongolia, and so stand-up comedian when I left for that trip. So I was writing it. It was all written at the time and in the countries, and so there was a heavy focus on the comedy side of traveling. And so a rollicking good comedy adventure that just sort of frolics along, and it's got all that weird sort of stuff of just off-camera stuff that happens when you're traveling, not necessarily the same.
Right. I love the sound of that book in part because I have a friend, they're significantly older than me, and he spent his 20s, he and his wife backpacked across the United States a couple of times. Well, they hitchhiked, more technically accurate. And one of those times was with an infant son. They hitchhiked across the entire country. And when one of their sons grew up, he decided he wanted to follow in his dad's footsteps. So he hitchhiked across the country. He ended up having quite the adventure in, I believe it was in the Rockies, that became, I think, national news. And it was interesting because our house was actually the last stop he made before I dropped him off to hitchhike over to, I think he was in Colorado. So I always love stories like this. And I always need to know what makes somebody want to hitchhike, or in this case, backpack across places you've never been.
It's a good question. And I'm not sure that it would be tempting to say, well, it varies for everybody. A lot of people have got lots of different reasons, but I'm not sure it does. I think everybody's in some sort of a quest to find bigger parts of themselves. And the easiest and most obvious way to find those bigger parts of ourselves, or at least the first port of call, is to go and find ourselves in a bigger world. we don't have the backstory, or we don't have the support, or we don't have the safety nets maybe, or we don't have the familiarity. When you're out there in the bad world and you're all alone, it can be it's almost a claustrophobic feeling because you're so far away and you're so far out on your own. And so I think that people crave that, whether they know it or not, whether it's subconscious we create or not, we create sort of being out of control and being in a new environment, and crave the parts of ourselves that we find in those experiences. And so the easiest way to do that is to get out of your comfort zone and go visit the world and have an adventure.
I'm contemplating what you're saying and kind of wondering, like, I think I have some sense of adventure. I've driven across this country. The car I used to have had been to every single corner of this country. I used to drive with 8 of my 9 children by myself with them from Seattle to Minneapolis, which is about a 29-hour drive.
Wow.
And so I'm not afraid to get out there, but I've never really had a desire to backpack. And I'm wondering if in part it's because I grew up in the military, so I have seen a fair amount of the world. But these backpacking stories always intrigue me too. And why a place like Pakistan or Afghanistan? Did you have any fear of some of the violence in those places?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I never had a plan. I just bought a one-way ticket to Thailand when I left. There was no plan for me whatsoever, so I didn't plan on going to Pakistan or Afghanistan. But you'll have to read the book. It's quite a good story, but definitely not safe there. Definitely not safe. And I was scared.
Well, see, this is what I always...
In saying that too, I must add that everybody was very friendly in those countries. People helped me far above and beyond. I was never directly physically threatened. It's the same old story of what's happening on the ground is not what's happening on the news. It's very easy to paint a picture of the people with the towels on their heads doing all this crazy stuff because CNN showed 30 seconds. That is not the reality of any country I've ever been to ever at all. 98% of people only help you, couldn't do enough.
I think that in general, the leadership of a country is creating a lot of the news things versus the average person. And I found that, like, I'm assuming in Australia, you've heard that everybody in New York City is so loud and brash and rude. I'm assuming the whole world believes that. That's not my experience. I mean, they have a different manner of speaking. But the story I always tell about that is when I went to drop my daughter off for her freshman year, she was going to college in New York City. I didn't have GPS, and I had to somehow get out of New York City, and I had no clue how. And so these 4 resident assistants, I mean, if I hadn't listened to their words, it seemed like they were all just yelling and talking over each other and shouting at me and at each other. But they were just trying to help. And that speaking loudly is just sort of their manner. But they were genuinely they weren't even arguing with each other, even though their voices were loud. And to a Midwesterner, it sounded like arguing, but I realized it wasn't. That's just how they express themselves. I found people in New York City to be very friendly and very helpful, just like what you're saying.
Yeah, I think the world is inherently good, and it can be. It's so the view of our own world is so warped by today's media and who owns it, that it's almost helping now. It's become so ridiculous. The story that we're being told and the decisions that are being made on behalf of us and in the world are so far removed from the conversations that we're all having in the streets that I think it's now actually just breaking itself because it's just utter nonsense, operating on fumes in hot air with no foundation. Yes. We're all wandering around looking at each other going, well, what? So in that sense, the COVID sort of beginning of COVID really started a whole revolution that's really gaining pace right now. And it's made
which has to do with I believe it's your 3rd book about Smiley Face Fatigues. Did I get the name right even?
Yeah. Yeah. So in January or February 2020, we all saw that there was a Chinese chap had dropped over in the street and that we all needed to absolutely crap our pants and run for the hills. In a 0.01 of a second, I thought there's something wrong with this. This is not it just didn't ring true intuitively for me at all from the very, very, very get-go. And then I remember saying to people, if this does go for more than 2 weeks to flatten this curve, then we've got a real problem. At that stage, I hadn't done any type of research, and therefore was never forced into any type of reaction around these so-called conspiracy theories. Not a Skerrick, but at that stage, I started sort of researching, and I realised very, very quickly that we've got a big problem on our hands, and this is a very small part of a very big plan. So I started standing up quite strongly against it. It was a very lonely place back then. It was still extraordinary to me how many people bought into that, and still is.
Yep.
But it's got a lot better now. A lot of people were forced into sort of decisions, but I won't jump ahead. So in August 2020, I went to a protest in Sydney, which was I'd never been to a protest before, and so it was a very small protest. There must have been only 200 or 300 people there against COVID and the lockdowns and the mandates that were coming and everything that we knew was happening. And the riot police were there, and it was so crazy. And I won't go into that, but it was really quite. I remember standing in the middle of that protest with the big overall wearing, helmet wearing, knuckle dusting, knuckleheads of police sort of beating people up, thinking, what? Not only what country am I in, what planet am I on? I mean, it was so far removed during the reason that we were there, and how obvious it was that it really was like the trapdoor had fallen out of the world at that stage in the world, and we were all just falling, figuring out how do we live in this new world where everybody's nuts and there's kids dying, and we're being attacked for sort of selling the truth based on cold hard facts. We'd slingshotted so far into the stratosphere from where we thought reality was. Such an instant that it was hard to get a grasp. You'd almost physically find yourself grasping at air at the disbelief of it and the indignation of it, and how could this even be 1 second into it, let alone all of these decisions. But anyway, so I walked away from that protest thinking, what a wasted opportunity. There was only 200 or 300 people there, but we've got a real problem in the world right now. Nobody shared numbers. No one was a support for each other. Nobody knew where anybody lived. We didn't really make a dent in it like we could. The protest gave them an opportunity to focus all of their resources on that one specific event at that one specific time. So I sort of just went away and came up with this idea for a stand. It wasn't a protest as such, it was more a stand, and it would be more a local approach. So everybody in their area could come together in their local parks, meet up and become a support for each other, and have a real life energy exchange. So rather than just sharing online like a lot of people were doing there, we would be in the person, in the physical, having a physical energy exchange, which is just as important as food. We'd know where each other were. We could share contacts. We could share information. If the internet or something went down, then we'd know where to go. It was every Sunday at 10 to 11 a.m. And so there was no need for any organisers to be arrested. There's no need for any organisation. We'd just be down there, and there was no agenda. There was no leaders. There was no religion, so there couldn't be any division in there. We'd just wear yellow in unity, and we'd stand for personal truth. And so a lot of different people have got different versions of truth. It isn't set in stone. According to our past, according to our religion, according to our current beliefs, according to our situation, doesn't matter. Even if you completely disagree with me, we're standing for each other's truth. And that's what I did from the very beginning. I decided I was going to start this stand in the park, it was called, and I was going to go into Hyde Park, Sydney, Australia at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning to do this stand in the park. I said, I'm going to be standing for my truth and my freedom. If you want to stand for your truth and your freedom, I'll be in the park. We'll stand together. Totally linear. And so I did. So I went in there and stood there in the park on a Sunday, drove all the way in there, and I'd announced it on all of the Freedom sort of Facebook groups at the time, and nobody came. I stood there all by myself, made sure I stood there for the full hour, and left, and thought, no worries, first week. Next week I announced it all and drove all the way into the park and stood there in my little yellow vest I had on at the time. Nobody came. Next week, same thing. Nobody came. Next week, nobody came. Next week, nobody came. Next week, nobody came. I stood there every Sunday from 10 to 11 a.m. for nearly 3 months by myself. And people were watching. I was announcing it, and people have said in the part in since that they were sort of looking at me going, "What's he doing?" And there was videos of me at the time.
Did you hold a sign, or
sorry?
What did you talk? Did you hold a sign or say anything?
It wasn't as much as about moving ourselves energetically and physically and drawing a line in the sand and connecting with each other. And so there's videos that I was doing at the time saying, we're all standing here for freedom. We're standing for truth. We're standing for the elderly. There was nobody else there. It was just me.
The royal we.
I'm standing here. But eventually 2 people came, and then another 2 people came, and then another stand started, then another 10 stands started, then another 100 stands started, and then there was within about 6 months or 8 months there was 1,500 stand in the parks in nearly 40 countries, and so it's done so many amazing things in the park.
And because so many things are being censored, I never even heard about this.
Yeah, exactly.
So I do have to ask. Some of the videos I saw coming out of various countries, one specifically in Australia, again, you know, our worldview is shaped by what the media is telling us. You tell me if I totally, you know, if we were given the wrong impression, but I was seeing videos about people who they thought might be COVID positive. They tested negative, but it's like, too bad, we're putting you in this camp anyway. And they were just taken against their will. I can remember this one woman very clearly, and they weren't allowed to leave the little cabins they had. I mean, how were you not arrested, or was the news exaggerated?
Yeah, no, they arrested me and put me in jail, and then kicked me out of Sydney. I was organising all of the bigger protests in Sydney as well. So at the same time I was doing Stand in the Park, I was doing lots of videos online, and I was also organising the big protests in the middle of the city in Sydney. One which sort of culminated in sort of 100,000 people plus coming into the city, and there was a lockdown at that stage, so I shouldn't have organised it. And so less than a week later, I was in jail and kicked out of Sydney, and bail restrictions that a violent offender wouldn't have, and then they dropped all the charges. So it was just a political prisoner. So
it's political, right?
Yeah.
Right. So you wrote a book about that, and do you want to tell the audience anything about the book in particular?
Well, I've covered the first part of it. It's got a big chunk of my life story in there, which a lot of people sort of enjoy as much as anything. And then it goes into it's a real time sort of it's a historical document. I mean, when I look back over that book, because there's a lot of what is in the book is what I was saying at the time online, and so it was all unfolding, and there was a sort of a cruciality between the videos that I was doing, which is a feature in the book about how it was unfolding and what was happening and what we were all feeling, and then there's a sort of a factual documentary of it at the same time as the decisions that were being made and what was happening in the news at the time. And so between the cruciality of me in the moment at that time and the factual foundation of it that just is so ridiculous. You look back over that of what was happening and the decisions being made and what the politicians were saying, and it is absolutely unhinged. It's even worse to look back on. And so it's an interesting it's an interesting historical document, and it's an interesting read into just what was going on. Quite uncomfortable at times, because it really was uncomfortable, and it's cringeworthy looking back. But I also need to say that because we're talking about the Art of Shhh today, is that that's what started the Stand in the Park. As far as people have said, I've always said I didn't stand in the park. My truth stood in that park, and I think a lot of people can say, yeah, the truth against the government and the truth against them, know the truth and all that sort of stuff. But if you exchange the word truth for intuition, I don't make any of my decisions. I just operate in intuition and feeling. And so, as far as I'm concerned, I stood in that park. My intuition stood me in that park, and to stand there for 3 months, it wasn't like I was sort of battling with my head at that stage. I was just standing in the park waiting for another feeling to come, to leave or do something, or something was happening. I was almost it wasn't a conscious decision, and there was no words and thoughts in it the whole time. And so the Art of Shhh directly led me into starting a Stand in the Park. It directly led me into the financial freedom that I've got. It directly led me into the happiness and the openness that I've got as well. Directly, absolutely, because when you're in your intuition, then the action will take itself, and the closer we get to our intuition, then the bigger the action that gets taken.
Right.
And
that's an amazing
book.
story. Oh yeah. Are you ready with your reading from it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So this is fairly early in the book. We all have a voice. I'm sorry. We all have a story. Every single one of us has a story. In fact, each story is made up of multiple stories. Our stories are made up of the events and incidents and conversations and thoughts and circumstances and things that we have experienced throughout our lives. These stories build or reinforce each other, and some contradict each other. One of my stories was that I didn't receive the love I needed when I was a child. Scaffolding off that was the story that my father hated me. I had stories that told me of one of my business ideas that had failed to take off, while other stories contradicted that and said that I was successful in business. When I was younger, one of my stories was that I could get girls fairly easily, yet another story was that I wasn't successful with girls once I'd got them. Our stories can be constructed from something seemingly insignificant as a word, a glance, a sound, or a touch, and they can also be derived from lack of these things. Some stories are truly horrific, but they're over now. We all have a voice. You have a voice in your head. We all do. Some people call it their internal monologue or dialogue. It's this voice that's using your past to construct your current story. It's this voice that might have hunkered down just now because it's been exposed or jumped up and said, "What voice?" The voice has convinced you that it's you thinking. It sounds like you. It's in your head and it speaks on your behalf, but it's not your true self. The voice uses our stories against us. It wants to keep us small and stuck. It does this out of self-preservation. It's self-preservation, not yours. It is the voice that we need to shush in order to find our true self. The voice in your head is clever. It has become so pervasive, so constant and so cunning that it has convinced you that it is you, when in fact it is made of pure bullshit. That's right, part of you, possibly a lot of you, is pure fantasy, projection and programming. You are not your thoughts. Think about what that actually means. Don't gloss away from it or gloss over it. Go deeper with your attempt to understand it. In many parts of our lives, we are simply acting like ourselves, or more to the point, our voice is dictating our actions and reactions. It's as though we were playing a part based on the stories from our past. We are not operating from an intuitive perspective, instead from a cerebral perspective. Many of us are trying to be who we think we are, or even worse, who we think we should be. We are actors in our own B-grade movie, built on a set propped up with flimsy sticks and cheap bricks, riddled with bad practices and crumbling mortar. We have pieced together our idea of what we are with rickety boards made from other people's beliefs, rusty bent nails picked up from misconceived references, and old scotch tape handed down from our parents. We have lived in the past and worried so much about the future that we've become paralysed by fear and doubt. Conversely, some of us think we're God's gift to humanity because we have fame, money, acclaim, or power. This is just as poisonous and just as false. The voice has convinced you that these constructs are your true self, where in reality, they are a walking, talking version of your experience, beliefs, and programming masquerading as your true self. The voice in your head is trying to gain leverage over other people and responsibility and offset responsibility for your emotional growth.
It's a wonderful reading, and I think that there are a lot of people who can really benefit from this book. What do you think what is the connection between trauma and overthinking and that constant hamster brain?
When we're young, we're taught, try and solve that maths problem and don't touch that hot stove. That equals pain. And when we get older, we need to be doing the exact opposite. We've been so deconditioned from feeling these days that even if we have a bad day, we'll go straight to the doctor and he'll prescribe us antidepressants. We're so pain averse that it's directed us away from our old physical pain and processing it. And so when we're older, we can sit there and try and figure out what happened to it, why that man did that to us when we were 7. But all the words in all the languages of all the dictionaries ever over 1,000 years can't solve that. There's no reason for that. We run away from our pain, so we'll sit there trying to solve it, laying awake at night, feeling bad, and self-masochizing. There was another word that I was looking for, or whatever. And then drink a bottle to stop. So try and figure it out, but avoid the pain. Whereas we need to just shut the crap up and go into it. And so when we feel the pain of the childhood come up, we need to go into it and really unlock it by feeling that pain from our body, exercising from the body, which we can only do by going into it. So we're doing exactly the wrong thing. We're trying to figure it out and running away from the pain, where we should be shutting the brain up so that there's not the labels that we talked about earlier on that pain, and then going right into the pain in a dark room by ourselves with no technology, because that's a big problem too, is the amount of smoke screens and opportunities that we have to just pull ourselves out of our moment with technology these days is
right.
A completely new thing. I mean, that was 2010 when smartphones came in, and that had changed the fabric of reality and everybody in it. And I don't think the cards have landed there. So there's far too many opportunities to divert from old pain, whereas perhaps we had to sit in it up until this point. So that's the key to the whole thing, is going into the old pain and unlocking it and feeling our feelings. Otherwise, it's in our body, and that's a big part of why we're seeing so much disease these days, and why there's a outer world. Sick people, and what they've done over the last 5 years and continue to do, could have only done this to sick people. We're very sick societies. We're very sick individuals. We're very sick communities. We're very fragmented. We're very divided. And that's the only reason why people could do something so crazy as what's happened over the last 5 years and continue to do so, is because they're not dealing with full-bodied, emotionally capable, spiritually rounded, grounded to the earth, connected, communicative, strong people. And so when we are, this doesn't happen in the world. The world will reflect. The world is a reflection of how we're feeling individually. And so it takes 100% personal responsibility, and in that there'll be 100% personal responsibility for the outer world and the physical world and the larger world and the bigger space as well.